Yeah, so I know that my stage presence often belies the extensive experience I have in theater and plays, but truth is, I was in school plays. There were two types of people who were in school plays. The kids who were into theater, and the kids who were into theater yet somehow managed to remain popular. This they accomplished by cross-promoting. Not only could they sing, dance, and act, they could also be cheerleaders or play sports or drive nice cars, wear the latest trendy clothes, and all the things you normally think of popular kids doing. And every theater kid knows this, and the rest of us in theater silently resented those guys. Because it seemed like the more popular you were, the bigger the roles you got. So while they got speaking parts, we were stuck playing parts like Soldier Number 2 in Pippin, or that one dirty hillbilly, Lil Abner. Even the somewhat less glamorous talking roles, say Seymour from Little Shop of Horrors or Eugene from Grease, even those went to some good-looking preppy kid. He'd get dressed up in nerd face and he'd learn to talk through his nose. When instead the director could have just drawn on the vast supply of boys who turned up for tryouts who had literally been spending their whole lives studying to play that role. Now it was senior year and the big school play was Oklahoma. You've all seen Oklahoma. Big, menacing Judd Fry Goliaths his way around while cute, charming little Curly, the cowboy, readies his sling to save the day. And they're both competing for the affections of lovely Miss Laurie, who in the end rides off into the proverbial sunset with the nicer of the two. This failed to reflect the realities of high school, as we knew them, because the small nice guy never really won out over the big mean brute in real life. And you can see this truth reflected in the other works of popular fiction at the time. For instance, Brian was the only one in the Breakfast Club who didn't get a girl. Maybe Roy Dobler did, but only after she'd lost everything else in her life, so he was a bit of a consolation prize, and he was a closet jock anyway. No, typically the small nice guy was the ducky, only generally we think of Ducky as simply being shot down for the date, not stabbed in the chest with his own knife after getting in a fight with Blaine. See, that's how Oklahoma ends. Big, bad Judd pulls a knife on Curly, and after a tussle ends up getting gutted. In the climactic battle, enthralling both the audience and the onstage onlookers alike, because Curly doesn't stand much of a chance against the well-armed hulking brute bearing down on him, so when he wins, we all sort of overlook the fact that he's just murdered a guy, and instead cheer for his having won the battle and saved the day in the face of insurmountable odds. Not to mention he's won Laurie's heart through the age-old high school tradition of beating up all the other suitors. Now, in order for this dynamic to have the full effect, two very important casting decisions have to be made. Judd must be played by someone big and scary, while Curly must not. Unfortunately, Curly's part, being the lead, went to a popular football player, and Judd, well, that was me. Now, in retrospect, I understand the casting of Curly wasn't based solely on popularity. It was also because that other kid could sing, and admittedly, I couldn't. Now, you don't get the lead in a high school musical if you can't hit the notes, at least not unless you're really popular, and we didn't have any of those kids trying out. So I guess the English teacher / director knew better than to expect an audience to sit through 145 minutes of me trying to shatter my way through Riders of Hammer Street. And this casting decision did ensure that notes would be hit, but it also transformed that play into an entirely different story. For instance, one thing Judd Fry should never have to do in the middle of his threatening and intimidating is crane his neck up to look Curly menacingly in the eye. It should also be somewhat believable that when Curly and Judd get into a fight, Judd stands a hellbound snowball's chance of walking away with at least one unbroken bone in his body. And neither of these were true of our production, and instead of the story of polite, non-threatening male archetype beating the menacing bad guy, it turned out into be more of a tale of quiet, lonely misanthrope losing out to the bully, and the girl being so impressed with said bully that the proverbial sunset was theirs into which to ride off. So it was a more realistic story in that the shy, scrawny Judd and tanned-toned Curly were both in competition for the affections of the same leading lady, and as often happens, she chose the rippling athlete over the twiggy misanthrope. So I'll give the director some credit there for having accurately illustrated the ways of high school romances, even though I wasn't particularly pleased with the idea of recreating some of my own life's more humiliating defeats through song and dance. I did feel a certain responsibility to take that role. Because as I've said, the talking parts didn't usually go to guys like me. Yet here I was playing a role with at least as much depth and dialogue as Ado Annie. And I couldn't turn that down. See, if I pulled this off, I'd be setting an example by which all future ordinary theater geeks could live. I'd be blazing a trail, paving the way for future generations of plain geeks to play Danny and Sandy, or Maria and Captain Von Trapp, or any number of spandex-clad alley cats. No, I didn't want to get beat up by the jock and ignored by the girl on stage every night for a week, but I had to do it. And not only that, I had to do it better than it had ever been done before, and to prove that it could be done. So I ate, slept, and breathed Judd Fry. I didn't just memorize his lines, I worked them into casual conversations, which was weird. I often refused to answer to anything other than Judd when I was in character, and I was pretty much in character all of the time. This made certain things, like my after-school job as a gas station attendant, a little awkward, but when the night came, I was ready to shine. This was going to be the one play that no one ever forgot. And all of our respective peer groups showed up that night. Lori's friends, Gap and guest-clad girls reeking of Aquanet filled a large number of seats. Both kinds of Curly's friends showed up, varsity and junior varsity. And even my friends had elected to use their parents' VCRs and tape Babylon 5 instead of watching it as it aired, so they could come out and support one of their own. And with those three student groups so well represented, the audience was a virtual powder keg of atomic wedgies, smashed glasses, and kicked textbooks, just waiting for a match. Fortunately, there was a play going on to distract them from each other. And when it came time for that fateful fight scene at the end, we made it believable. Like Bruce Lee in Enter the Dragon, or like Spidey fighting the Rhino. We had the audience on the edge of their seats, wondering if the linebacker cowboy would actually win against his smaller, faster nemesis. And most nights we pulled it off. After some scuffling, shuffling, and sleight of hand, I fell to the ground holding a knife in my chest. Now, if you've ever had to stab someone with a prop knife in a school play, you know how it works. There's a hollow hilt and a fake plastic blade, and when you stab someone, the blade slides into the hilt. And when you pull the knife away, the spring pops the blade back out. So if your audience is at least a little nearsighted or inattentive, it'll look to them like someone's just been stabbed. And one night as I was lying there on my back, holding the knife tight against my chest and playing dead, I started to think that the show hadn't quite gone perfectly. Specifically, I was convinced that my grip wasn't firm enough and that the knife might slip out of my hand and spoil the illusion. So, slowly, I began to adjust my grasp on the knife to get a more secure hold on it, and instead brought about the very scenario I'd been trying to avoid. As the handle slipped through my fingers, the tightly compressed spring inside expanded and launched the blade out against me. Now, the force of the blade sent the knife soaring into the air in a graceful, ballistic, parabolic arc, landing at Curly's feet. And everyone on stage tried to go on with their lines, trying hard not to call attention to what had just gone horribly wrong, as the laughter of jocks and chicks and geeks in a flurry erupted in the auditorium. And it was all anyone on stage could do to keep from breaking character and laughing with them. And finally, Curly decided he was just going to go with it. So he bent down and picked up the jumping knife and looked it over as the cast tensed, certain that the entire play had been ruined. Then he coolly observed, "Man, that's some knife." And the show went on, and I was dragged off by Cowboy number 3 and Farmer number 4, and the rest of the cast launched into the big group sing and wrapped it all up. Now, normally when someone dies on stage, the show always goes on and everything seems fine until the end. Then there's that awkward curtain call when a dead character struts out, free of blood, devoid of any injuries, and takes a bow along with the living. And if you ask me, that's what spoils the illusion every time. But for one night during a high school performance of Oklahoma, we didn't do that. When Judd Fry came back for his bow, it wasn't in some inexplicably reanimated dead villain way sauntering around the set. It was that guy that the others thought they'd kill, who then clearly used some sort of telekinesis to eject the knife from his body. Apparently went on to invoke his Wolverine healing factor behind the scenes. So he was able to come back out for a bow. Now, no one had to suspend their disbelief because of this. His survival was canon. It all made perfect sense. At least, That was the explanation that the geeks in the crowd offered, which led to some pummeling at the hands of the jocks, which prompted the girls to call out and cry for the jocks to stop. And eventually the teachers got involved, and emotions were so heated I half expected the Bayet teachers to start beating up on the science teachers. And, I don't know, maybe sexy librarians calling for them to stop. And in the aftermath of it all, I realized I hadn't quite blazed the trail I'd hoped to. In fact, if I'd done anything, I'd only illustrated the dangers of casting geeks in major roles. And the next year, and every year after that, only the popular kids got the parts with lines. But I did manage to make that play the one play that no one would ever forget. In fact, people still talk about it to this day. So there's that. Thank you.